Imagine pulling a sample of wood from, I don't know, the structural framing of a house. And the historical record unequivocally claims this house was built in 1990.
Right.
You send that sample to a lab for radiocarbon dating, expecting a neat, easy confirmation.
Sure, just to check the box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But instead, the lab results come back, and the data tells you that the tree used for that wood was chopped down during the Renaissance.
Which is a massive problem.
It's a complete mathematical nightmare. That jarring disconnect between the textbook timeline and the physical data, well, that is precisely what archaeologists are facing when they test the Great Pyramid at Giza.
Yeah, the friction between, the documented dynastic timeline and the actual physical reality of the Giza Plateau is basically the central problem of the entire site.
It really is.
We are dealing with an architectural landscape that stubbornly refuses to align with the neat sequential categorization that early modern archaeology tried to just impose on it.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are exploring a stack of excerpts from a heavily sourced, meticulously argued text called Beyond the Fourth Dynasty, the Layered Genesis of Giza.
It's a really fascinating text.
It is. And our mission today is to take a magnifying glass to the standard mainstream narrative. You know, the narrative that says King Khufu built the Great Pyramid as a giant tomb, case closed.
Right, the one we all learned in grade school.
Exactly. And we're going to dismantle it using hard architectural, geological, and textual evidence. And I want to be super clear with you listening right now. We aren't touching anything involving, like, extraterrestrials or crystal levitation.
Yeah, no sci-fi here.
Right. We are looking strictly at the data provided by mainstream archaeology and showing how that very data kind of shatters the case-closed mentality. Okay, let's unpack this, because the text begins by targeting a massive methodological error at the very foundation of the mainstream framework.
Yeah, specifically regarding how institutions like AERA, the Ancient Egypt Research Associates, how they interpret evidence.
Right, so break that down for us. What is this foundational error?
Well, the source text argues that the conventional framework relies on a philosophical fallacy, basically confusing possession with creation.
Possession versus creation.
Right. AERA and similar institutions, they operate on the premise that the large pyramids belong exclusively to Old Kingdom society. So they specifically placed the Great Pyramid's construction between 2589 and 2504 BC.
The reign of Khufu.
Exactly. They look at the evidence, so the presence of Khufu's administration, the movement of stone under his authority, his name attached to the site in later Egyptian memory, and they conclude that Khufu must have conceived, engineered, and laid the first stone of the structure.
Which seems logical on the surface.
On the surface, sure. But the text points out that this treats association as origin.
Right, I see.
A king stamping his identity onto a site, assigning labor to it, or even, completing portions of it, is not synonymous with primary authorship.
To put that in everyday terms for you listening, imagine you buy a massive, pre-existing historic estate.
Okay.
It has these deep, ancient foundations. You move in, you remodel the exterior, you completely re-landscape the grounds, and you put a massive iron gate at the front with your family crest on it.
Nice place.
Right. But then, thousands of years later, someone digs up that iron gate, sees your crest, and writes into the historical record that you were the original architect who designed the estate from virgin ground.
That analogy perfectly isolates the text's critique of the Khufu Genesis model. I mean, the mainstream approach takes the Fourth Dynasty material, the crest on the gate, basically, and reverse engineers a Genesis story to match it.
And the problem, as we kind of alluded to with the Renaissance wood example earlier, is that the scientific data actively resists that reverse engineered story.
Strongly resists it. The radiocarbon dating anomalies are probably the most glaring example of this friction.
Let's get into the mechanics of those AERA radiocarbon studies. Because when we talk about carbon dating the pyramid, we aren't testing the limestone itself, right? You can't carbon date a rock.
No, you can't. You need organic material.
Right, so we are testing the organic inclusions, like charcoal and ash, that got trapped in the gypsum mortar used between the stones during construction or renovation.
Exactly. And the 1984 Radiocarbon Dating Initiative, which was sponsored by the Edgar Cayce Foundation and actually conducted in part by AERA personnel, tested those exact organic inclusions.
And what did they find?
The results showed dates that averaged 374 years older than the accepted historical timeline for Khufu.
374 years. I mean, that is not a minor calibration error. That pushes the material back centuries before Khufu's administration even existed.
Right. And recognizing the severity of that anomaly, a second round of testing was conducted in 1995.
To double-check the math, basically.
Yeah, they figured the first batch must have been contaminated or something. But those 1995 dates still skewed 100 to 200 years older than the Cambridge Ancient History dates for the Old Kingdom.
Wow.
Furthermore, the 1995 dates extracted specifically from the Great Pyramid scattered across a 400-year span.
A 400-year scatter.
Yes,
Yeah.
just in the organic material trapped in the mortar.
That's incredible. I mean, if you are trying to attribute the entire genesis, engineering, and construction of this massive sacred machine to a single king whose reign lasted maybe, what, 2 or 3 decades?
Roughly, yeah.
A 4-century scatter is a devastating piece of data. It tells you that the materials being integrated into the structure carry a temporal footprint vastly wider than the 4th dynasty.
It does. And the mainstream response to this scatter is what they call the Old Wood Defense.
The Old Wood Defense? Walk us through that.
So the hypothesis suggests that the builders in Khufu's era were utilizing trees that had been felled centuries prior.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they argue that maybe they were harvesting from ancient, slow-growing desert trees or recycling timber from older dismantled structures.
Right, so the wood is old, but the fire is new.
Exactly. By burning this ancient wood to create the ash for the mortar, the radiocarbon date reflects the death of the tree, not the moment the mortar was mixed.
But the source text points out the irony of that defense, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Because by deploying the old wood theory just to protect the Khufu timeline, the mainstream is essentially conceding the text's broader argument.
The text highlights that the old wood defense is an outright admission of chronological complexity. I mean, if the builders are incorporating centuries-old material from previous eras, the site and the material culture surrounding it are not a clean, singular 4th dynasty timestamp.
Right.
You cannot look at a 400-year scatter of organic data, rely on the recycling of ancient ruins to explain it away, and then simultaneously claim you have an airtight, scientifically indisputable proof of a virgin ground genesis under one king.
It's a contradiction.
Completely. The physical data is inherently messy and points to a multi-generational, deeply layered timeline.
Okay, I want to push back on this, though, with the strongest weapon in the mainstream arsenal, the Diary of Merer.
Of course.
Because when these timeline anomalies are brought up, historians almost universally point to the Merer Papyri as the ultimate smoking gun.
They do. It's their anchor.
We have 4th dynasty logbooks written by an official named Merer, detailing the transportation of fine white Tura limestone by boat to Giza. And it explicitly refers to the horizon of Khufu.
Yes, it does.
So, if we have the literal shipping manifest for the stone, how is that not definitive proof of Khufu's authorship of the pyramid?
That's a great question, and the text addresses the Merer Papyri thoroughly. It absolutely acknowledges their authenticity and importance. The issue is not the document itself, but the extrapolation applied to it.
Meaning they read too much into it.
Exactly. The papyri document, 4th dynasty logistics. They proved that Khufu's administration was highly active at Giza, transporting casing stones. But a shipping manifest for limestone is not a foundational blueprint.
Ah.
The text argues that the papyri do not contain a mandate of Genesis. They do not say, we have broken ground on a new conceptual architecture today. They detail the movement of materials for a project that the administration has claimed and named.
It goes back to the historic estate analogy.
Exactly.
Merer's diary is basically the ledger for the contractors you hired to deliver the stone for your new facade and your iron gate.
Right. You're buying the materials for a renovation.
Right. It proves you did massive work on the property. It proves you claimed it. But treating a logistical ledger for exterior casing stones as the explanation for the origin of the entire underlying architectural anomaly is a massive overreach.
It is substituting a late administrative layer for the foundational reality of the site. And this specific type of substitution, where a later assumption is plastered over a foundational mystery well, that brings us to the most universally accepted fact about the Great Pyramid.
Which is its function as a tomb.
Yes.
The tomb theory. Let's talk about the interior, because the interior of the Great Pyramid is entirely devoid of the intricate funerary wall programs that really define Egyptian mortuary architecture.
It's completely blank.
No pyramid texts, no depictions of the afterlife, no spells for the king's resurrection. It is just mathematically severe, perfectly aligned, bare stone.
And the mainstream framework attempts to reconcile this bareness by pointing to later periods.
How so?
Well, the elaborate pyramid texts, which map out the king's transition into the afterlife, they don't actually appear in the archaeological record until the late 5th and early 6th dynasties, beginning with a king named Unas.
Okay.
So the standard argument insists that we should view Khufu's pyramid as an earlier, undecorated iteration of that same funerary tradition,
Just a minimalist version.
basically. And they argue that the physical absence of a mummy or any grave goods is simply the result of antiquity's tomb robbers.
Which sounds plausible until you really think about it. The text calls this out as an epistemic closed loop.
Yes, the robbery patch.
Right. We are told it is a tomb, and when we ask why it is completely empty and lacks any internal mortuary grammar, we are told it was robbed.
Classic deflection.
But when we ask how we know it was a tomb to begin with, the underlying assumption is that the missing goods, which were robbed, would have proven it.
It is textbook circular reasoning. The inference of a robbery is generated out of thin air to explain the discrepancy between the theory and the physical reality.
Yeah.
And then that generated inference is codified as a historical fact. The text emphasizes a really critical principle here. Absence cannot be transmuted into evidence by hallucinating the missing data.
I love that phrasing, hallucinating the missing data. To contrast this, the text looks at the exterior of the pyramid.
Right, the casing stones.
Yeah. National Museums, Scotland, documents that the Great Pyramid was once sheathed in highly polished fine white Tura limestone. That's the very stone Mirror was transporting in his diary.
The exact stuff.
And we know that by the medieval period, much of this casing was systematically stripped to build mosques and fortifications in Cairo under rulers like Bahal and Garachash.
Right, and the distinction the source text draws here is vital for historiography. We have a distinct historical record of the exterior stripping.
We literally know who took it and where they put it.
Exactly. We can trace the missing casing stones to specific later architectural contexts. We have solid evidence of the removal. But in stark contrast, there is absolutely no corresponding 4th or 5th dynasty textual record that says we've reached the upper chambers of Khufu's monument, extracted his golden artifacts, and left the interior bare.
So what does this all mean?
Well, it means the mainstream narrative is smuggling an unrecorded, highly convenient historical event into the timeline.
A pristine, total extraction robbery.
Right. They are smuggling that in just to protect a fragile assumption.
Okay.
When you strip away that assumption, you are left with the only verifiable fact regarding the interior.
Absolute bareness.
Yes. The architecture was designed to be severe, silent, and empty.
Confronting the monument without the protective shield of the robbed tomb theory forces a structural reevaluation of the architecture itself, doesn't it?
It really does. We have to look at the physical geometry not as a ruined, looted container for a missing king, but as a deliberate statement in stone.
Which leads us into what the text identifies as the eightfold wound.
This is one of my favorite parts.
It's mind-blowing. We are taught from childhood that a pyramid is a square base with 4 flat triangular faces meeting at an apex. That is the literal definition of the shape.
But the physical reality of the Great Pyramid completely defies that basic geometric definition.
Explain that.
The text references the 2023 photogrammetric analysis by Akio Kato. And Kato's work actually built upon much older, meticulous structural surveys conducted by Flinders Petrie way back in the late 19th century.
So this isn't even new data.
No, Petrie noticed it over 100 years ago. Both the historical ground surveys and modern aerial data confirm that the Great Pyramid features a deliberate, slight concavity on each of its 4 faces.
An indentation running down the center of each face.
Yes.
Essentially bisecting the triangles.
Exactly. The core masonry was engineered with a fractional inward angle. And this is not a settling issue or an artifact of erosion, you know.
Right. It's deliberate.
It requires the foundational blocks to be laid with a specific, intentional inward slope from day one. So structurally, the Great Pyramid is not a 4-sided monument at all.
It is a concave, octagonal, 8-sided pyramid.
Yes, 8 sides.
And this isn't visible if you're just standing at the base taking a tourist photo.
Right.
Evan. You need specific lighting conditions like the sun grazing the faces during the equinoxes, or you need to view it from above to see the shadow line perfectly split the faces in half.
Right.
It is a massive 8-fold geometry engineered into millions of tons of stone, and it's just hiding in plain sight.
What's fascinating here is the theological implication of that specific geometry within the Egyptian corpus.
Oh, this is where it gets so deep.
Yeah, because a 4-sided monument aligns cleanly with standard solar theology. You know, the 4 cardinal directions, the stable foundation of the earth.
Very standard stuff.
But integrating a hidden 8-sided geometry into the core masonry shifts the symbolic register entirely. The number 8 is the foundational architecture of the Hermopolitan creation theology.
The Ogdoad.
The Ogdoad.
And this is where the standard royal tomb theory really starts to hemorrhage credibility for me.
Yeah, because the Ogdoad, which translates simply to the Eight, represents the state of the cosmos before the dawn of creation.
Before anything existed.
Right, it is the theology of the primordial void. The text cites Britannica and Smart History to outline the structure of the Ogdoad. It's made up of 4 male-female divine pairs who personify the chaotic, formless state of the universe prior to the emergence of the first solid mound of Earth.
So you have Nun and Nonnet representing the chaotic primeval waters.
Right.
Amun and Amenet representing hiddenness or invisibility.
Yep.
Kuk and Kauket representing primordial darkness. And Hahet representing infinity or formlessness.
It is a vocabulary of deep pre-creation physics.
And a hidden 8-sided architectural form is a physical manifestation of that exact theology.
That's the argument, yeah. The Great Pyramid is speaking the language of primordial, before-creation architecture. It is an Ogdoadic monument designed to symbolize the primeval waters and the hidden forces of the precosmos.
And the text points out the massive, glaring mismatch between this Ogdoadic architecture and the identity of the king who claimed it, because Khufu's full historical name is Khnum Khufu.
Which means protected by Khnum.
Right. And who is Khnum?
Well, Khnum is the creator deity associated with the source of the Nile. He's typically depicted as a ram-headed god who fashions human beings on a potter's wheel.
Okay.
So he is a completely distinct theological entity from the Ogdoad of Hermopolis.
So if Khufu were engineering the ultimate eternal reflection of his own cultic identity from virgin ground, the foundational geometry doesn't fit his name at all.
Not even a little bit.
The monument is structurally dedicated to a deep 8-fold theology of primeval waters, not to the potter god Khnum. It's the architectural equivalent of finding a temple whose foundational geometry is perfectly mapped to the Hindu pantheon, but the bronze plaque on the door says it was built by a medieval Catholic king.
That's a brilliant way to look at it. The plaque tells you who claimed it, not who designed the foundation.
Exactly.
Khufu is absolutely insufficient as a structural and symbolic explanation for the monument. He represents a layer of possession, while the 8-fold geometry represents a much deeper layer of theological origin.
And if the Ogdoad represents the theological concept of primeval waters, the physical geology of the Giza Plateau introduces actual physical primeval waters to the timeline.
Oh yes, this is a crucial pivot.
This takes us down the plateau to the Sphinx. We are shifting from architectural geometry to geomorphology.
And the text relies heavily here on the geomorphological research of Colin Reeder. He analyzes the specific degradation patterns within the Sphinx enclosure.
And the mechanics of the erosion are critical here, aren't they?
Very much so. Because a limestone plateau in a hyper-arid desert environment, like Egypt, typically exhibits aeolian weathering.
Which is erosion driven by wind and sand.
Exactly. And wind erosion creates horizontal stratification. It wears away the softer layers of rock and leaves the harder layers protruding horizontally.
But that is not what we see on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure.
No, it's not. Reeder's study identifies deep vertical fissures in the limestone walls surrounding the Sphinx.
Vertical fissures?
Yes, and these are classical markers of precipitation-induced weathering. The physical mechanics of flowing water, specifically heavy, sustained rainfall runoff cascading over the edges of the enclosure, that is what carves those vertical channels.
But the Saharan climate during the 4th dynasty, when Khufu and his immediate predecessors and successors were operating, was incredibly arid.
Right.
It could not provide the sustained massive rainfall required to carve those vertical runoff channels into the solid bedrock.
No, the climatology just doesn't support it. The geomorphology demands a climatological context that predates the arid conditions of the Old Kingdom.
By a lot.
By a lot. The erosion data indicates that the Sphinx enclosure was subjected to a significantly wetter climate, which forcefully suggests that pre-4th dynasty development occurred at Giza. The site was an active, sacred landscape long before Khufu's administration arrived to move casing stones.
The mainstream model, what the text calls the flat Khufu model, demands that we compress all of this data into a single dynastic century.
Which is possible.
Right. We have to squeeze the 400-year radiocarbon scatter, the anomalous lack of mortuary texts, the hidden 8-fold primeval geometry, and the vertical water erosion all into one reign.
It just doesn't fit.
No. But the text proposes an alternative that actually respects the complexity of the data, which is the layered model.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the layered model approaches Giza not as a single construction event, but as a stratigraphic accumulation.
Like an ancient tell where cities are built upon the ruins of older cities.
Exactly like that. And the text outlines 6 distinct layers to this model.
Okay, let's run through them. Layer 1 is the ancient sacred landscape. So that's the geological reality of the Sphinx enclosure and the deep antiquity indicated by the water erosion.
Right. Then layer 2 is the conceptual dawn of the site. This is the theological integration of primordial water and the concept of the first emergent mound of creation.
The Ogdoad entering the picture.
Yes.
Layer 3 is the physical realization of that concept. The actual engineering of the hidden 8-sided Ogdoadic geometry of the Great Pyramid, which was designed to reflect that pre-creation void.
Then layer 4 is the arrival of the dynastic claim.
Yeah.
The subsequent civilization interacts with this monumental inheritance. They find it, basically.
Right, which leads to layer 5, the Khufu era. This is where the Meru papyri fit perfectly. The administration organizes massive labor to recase the monument, renovate the site, stamp it with Khufu's royal identity, and absorb the ancient architecture into the contemporary cult.
It fits the data perfectly. And finally, layer 6 is the long phase of subsequent trauma and interpretive memory loss.
Memory loss.
Yeah, the casing stones are stripped in the medieval era. The original theological function is forgotten. The internal bareness is rationalized as a robbery. The layered history of the site is flattened by later historians into the single name found on the most recent layer of renovations.
It is a profound historiographical argument. The flat Khufu model requires us to ignore or excuse massive amounts of physical data.
Or just call it old wood.
Right. But the layered model allows all the data to exist without contradiction. And this theme of memory loss of later cultures inheriting a fragmented understanding of an older reality, this is where the source text makes a really fascinating pivot.
It really is a sharp turn.
It leaves the Egyptian sands entirely and looks at how the Greeks handled Egyptian memory, specifically focusing on Plato and the story of Atlantis.
The inclusion of Plato's Timaeus and Critias in this analysis is highly deliberate. The text emphasizes that within the dialogues themselves, Plato does not present the narrative as a Greek myth or, an allegorical invention.
No, the provenance of the story is explicitly Egyptian.
Exactly. The Greek statesman Solon traveled to Egypt and received the history from the priests at the city of Sais.
So the Greeks are positioned as the inheritors of a fragmented memory, not the authors of it.
That's a crucial distinction. And the geographical parameters provided in that transmission are highly specific and rigorously bound.
Walk us through Plato's map, essentially.
Plato writes that the power of Atlantis emerged from the Atlantic Ocean. The text states the island lay in front of the Pillars of Heracles, which was the ancient designation for the Strait of Gibraltar.
He describes a very specific maritime route, doesn't he?
He does. He describes an island that acts as a passage to other islands, which eventually lead to an opposite continent that entirely surrounds the true ocean.
And the text underscores Plato's explicit contrast between internal and external waters.
Right.
The Mediterranean is described as a harbor with a narrow entrance, whereas the water beyond the Pillars of Heracles is defined as the real, outer, true sea.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I want to spend time dismantling the most common rationalization mainstream historians use here.
Oh, the Crete theory.
Yes.
Yes.
To avoid dealing with a transatlantic ancient civilization, they often claim Plato was simply exaggerating the Minoan eruption on the island of Crete. They shrink the story to fit a local Mediterranean event.
Right, because Crete had a volcano, so they just say, oh, that must be Atlantis.
But the source text aggressively dismantles the Crete hypothesis by showing how it violates literally every geographic parameter Plato established.
Let's hear it.
Crete is an internal Aegean island. It is located deep within the Mediterranean basin. But Plato's geography is aggressively outward-facing. It directs the orientation through the western gate of Gibraltar into the Atlantic system.
So it's pointing the wrong way entirely.
Completely. Suggesting Crete is the opposite continent surrounding the outer ocean is a geographic absurdity that requires mutilating the primary text.
It is the exact same reductionist methodology used at Giza.
Yes.
Shrink the multi-layered anomalous data until it fits comfortably inside a localized, easily managed box. Khufu is the box for Giza. Crete is the box for Atlantis.
That is exactly what they do. Furthermore, the text introduces the concept of the translation layer, which parallels the physical layers at Giza.
Okay, explain that.
In the Critias, Plato reveals that the names in the narrative, including Atlantis itself, were not the original names.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Atlantis is a Greek word.
Exactly. The Egyptian priests provided the narrative to Solon using Egyptian names. Solon, according to Plato, investigated the meaning of those names and translated them into Greek equivalents for his audience.
So the word Atlantis didn't exist in the original Egyptian account.
No. The text argues that Atlantis is merely a Greek-facing translation layer draped over an older Egyptian source memory.
Just as Khufu's name is an administrative layer draped over an older Ogdoadic architecture, the word Atlantis is a linguistic layer.
It's the same phenomenon.
If you treat the Greek translation as the origin of the concept, you are committing the exact same error as treating Khufu's renovation as the origin of the pyramid.
Perfectly said. If we respect the geography of the transmitted memory, we must look westward, beyond the Pillars of Heracles, across the Atlantic system to the opposite continent.
And the direct oceanic counterweight to the Mediterranean world is the Americas.
And the Americas are not an empty wilderness.
No, they are not.
They are a monumental civilization field defined by the exact same architectural anomaly we've been discussing. Pyramids. The source text references Britannica's overview of Mesoamerican civilizations, highlighting their extraordinary, independent achievements.
Right.
We see the development of profound astronomical knowledge, complex mathematics, intricate hieroglyphic writing systems, and massive, monumental architecture.
And the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan is explicitly cited as a structure whose monumental scale and foundational footprint rival the Great Pyramid at Giza.
They are staggeringly similar in scope.
We have two massive, mathematically aligned pyramid fields anchoring opposite sides of the ocean.
This raises an important question regarding methodology and evidence, though, because the text explicitly warns against the simplistic diffusionist trap.
Right, we have to be careful here.
It is not arguing that a fleet of Egyptian ships sailed to Mexico and commanded the construction of Teotihuacan. That is a distraction. The argument centers on the phenomenon of sacred recurrence.
Sacred recurrence, because the mainstream relies on the independent engineering defense, don't they?
Yeah, that's their go-to.
They argue that if you want to build a very tall structure using stone, a triangle with a wide base is physically the most stable geometry. It's just gravity. Therefore, the Egyptians and the Mesoamericans independently discovered the same engineering solution.
But the text critiques that defense as profoundly inadequate. Engineering convergence explains the physics of the stones, sure.
Yeah, it explains why they don't fall down.
Right. But it utterly fails to explain the convergence of the complex symbolic grammar mapped onto those stones.
We aren't just talking about a stable pile of rocks. Both sides of the ocean tied the specific mountain geometry to an incredibly specific set of cosmological concepts.
Exactly. Mesoamerican religion, much like Egyptian theology, was deeply astral and calendrical. The text notes their intense focus on the cycles of the sun, the moon, and Venus.
The astronomy is baked in.
They utilized a highly specialized cast of priest astronomers to map the heavens and integrate those observations into complex calendrical rounds, such as the 52-year cycle.
They integrated sacred kingship, solar ascent, astronomical alignments, and calendrical mathematics into the very architecture of the pyramids.
Just like Egypt.
Why does the exact same highly specific heaven-earth grammar resolve into massive mountain geometry in completely disconnected hemispheres?
The Americas provide the comparative data that forces us to view the pyramid phenomenon not as an isolated dynastic anomaly, but as a massive, interconnected puzzle of human cognitive architecture.
It's all connected in a way we don't fully grasp yet.
The text identifies the overarching problem in modern historical analysis as the dissenter's method.
The method of reductionism.
Yeah. Yes. The dissenter looks at the vast, complex board of evidence and systematically reduces each piece to its smallest possible meaning.
Give us some examples of that.
Well, they reduce the grand, severe architecture of Giza to a local tomb. They reduce the lack of mortuary evidence to an unrecorded robbery. They reduce Plato's grand transatlantic geography to a volcanic eruption on Crete.
And they reduce the global recurrence of cosmologically aligned pyramid building to a trivial coincidence of gravity.
Exactly. Just a coincidence.
But when you actually stack the unreduced data together, the mainstream narrative shatters under the weight of it.
It does. Khufu explains a later phase of occupation and renovation, but his royal identity cannot explain the underlying eight-sided Ogdoadic geometry of the original architecture.
Right, and the Mera Papyri explain the logistics of moving limestone, but they do not provide the blueprint for the site's genesis.
The radiocarbon dating anomalies confirm the deep antiquity of the materials, but refuse to lock the genesis to a single dynastic century.
The vertical fissures in the Sphinx enclosure demand a climatological timeline that shatters the arid Old Kingdom compression.
And Plato's geography explicitly directs the memory of monumental civilization westward across the Atlantic, where the Americas stand as a mirror reflecting the same calendrical, astronomical pyramid architecture found in Egypt.
The conclusion of the text is not that it has perfectly solved every mystery or, definitively proven a specific alternative timeline. The conclusion is that the Khufu built a tomb case-closed explanation is physically, mathematically, and logically too small to hold the evidence.
The layered Genesis model is the only framework robust enough to accommodate the geological anomalies, the architectural concavity, the textual complexity of transmission, and the global comparative data without having to excuse or ignore inconvenient facts.
This entire deep dive is a masterclass in why we must critically evaluate the frameworks we inherit. When a textbook or an institution demands that you ignore the 400-year carbon scatter,
Sauce it out.
right, or demands that you pretend vertical water erosion is wind, or demands that you shrink an ocean to fit a Mediterranean island, they are prioritizing the safety of the narrative over the reality of the evidence.
True historical inquiry requires the courage to look at the anomalies and recognize that our understanding of human antiquity is far more layered, far more fragmented, and far deeper than the simplified models suggest.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, tracking the architectural anomalies of Giza through the translation layers of Greece, all the way to the calendrical mathematics of Mesoamerica. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the concept of sacred recurrence we just discussed.
It's a big one.
If this deeply complex heaven-earth grammar, the integration of mountain geometry, astronomical precision, and calendrical mathematics, was not physically carried across the ocean by ships,
No diffusion.
if it didn't diffuse through direct cultural contact, but instead erupted independently in completely isolated hemispheres, utilizing the exact same architectural and symbolic language, what does that reveal about the human mind itself?
That's the real question.
Are we looking at evidence of a dormant, hardwired architectural blueprint buried deep in the collective human consciousness?
A psychological foundation.
When we stare at the Great Pyramid or the Pyramid of the Sun, are we simply looking at ancient kings? Or are we looking at a mirror reflecting the deepest, oldest geometric structures inherent in our own cognition, just waiting for the right civilization to activate them? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the layers, keep looking for the hidden geometry, and we will catch you next time.